Let's pray, and then we'll start here. Lord, thank you so much just for just this morning, for this opportunity. Thank you, Lord, for your word and for your truth. And thank you, God, for, again, just revealing who you are and the overall plan for the Babylonians within your scriptures. I pray, God, that this would be beneficial and, of course, instructive. And now that you would be glorified overall in this. Thank you so much for it's in your son's name. Amen. Okay, let's go ahead and continue on here in chapter 6, part 2. We are looking at the timeline of Daniel, and we are now in the era of the Media Persian Empire, right? Daniel is about 60, mid 60s around this time. And now we are heading into, we're basically looking at um, um, Daniel's kind of life within, again, the Persian Empire under the reign of Cyrus and Darius. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar is and the Babylonian Empire overall has been disposed. And again, now we are in, again, looking at or focusing on Cyrus and his empire. Now, in chapter 7, we're actually going to take a time jump backwards. We're actually going to go back and back into essentially the Babylonian Empire, which is kind of interesting. We'll talk about why that jump, I think, is occurring, and we'll kind of muse about that. But right now, we are in the silver part of the empire. From the previous lecture, again, Daniel once more seems to be in trouble. Seems like this always happens. The leadership doesn't like him or his companions. They plot the scheme against him. They use the law essentially to trap Daniel, to put him into the lion's den for 30 days. That's the law. So it's essentially a death sentence at this particular time. Due to the commissioners and the satraps, again, Darius is thinking about making him the second in command as he was in the previous empire. So they don't like that very much. So they seek to have Daniel executed again by intrigue. The king, again, due to the customs of the Medes and the Persians, once a law is set or established by the king or someone who has been given the authority of said king, they cannot rescind that law. Okay? And of course, Darius is very troubled by this particular activity. So let's go ahead and continue here in verses chapter 6 or verse 16 of Daniel. Chapter 6 says, Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Your God, whom you constantly serve, will deliver you. King Darius, due to the law that he established, manipulated by the leadership, essentially, of Babylon, again, gave orders to seize him and throw him in the lion's den. I want to underscore this for 30 days. Okay, he's supposed to stay in there for 30 days based upon the ordinance that he established by way of the satraps and the commissioners. Now, I think there's a couple of details I think that ought to be looked at here. Let's go ahead and take a look at some details here. First, let's take a look at the phrase, your God. God is the word Elah. This word occurs 95 times in the scriptures. I was going to say Greek scriptures, but we're not looking at the Greek scriptures. 95 times in the scriptures. It occurs most in the book of Daniel, 53 times. Okay? Between chapters 2 and 7. Of course, this word is translated God or gods, depending upon what deity is being discussed within the context of this word being used. Okay, so it could refer to a deity of some sort, whether it be a false deity or the God of Israel, respectively. As you can see, there is a Aramaic letter or symbol in red on the top of the screen. This is actually this Aramaic letter functions as a pronominal in this construct of this word. Okay. This word, when used with this, or this letter, when used with this word, combined in this construct, is similar in gender, which is masculine, and number, which is singular, which is the same thing here, with the noun that is constructed. Okay, usually it's found at the end of the word that it is constructed with, but for this, just the sake of just our discourse, I put it separate. Again, it's translated your in this text. This letter, or this particular construction of this word, underscores that Darius the Mede acknowledges Daniel's God as Daniel's, which is very important. At this point, he has not said anything about him, okay, about himself, Darius. He just acknowledges Daniel's God. Your God will deliver you, right? The major point is that Darius the Mede, again, much like Nebuchadnezzar, acknowledges that Daniel's God is Daniel's only, but not his, which is interesting. Now, I think that at the end of the chapter, he's going to have a change of heart here. But at this point, he hasn't done that just yet. Okay? There's a couple of other things, too, that we can underscore concerning this major point of Darius, and that is the phrase that's translated constantly served, or constantly served, as you can see that here, represented by the colors on the screen. Tedidra is the word that is translated constantly. Okay, Tedidra. This Aramaic phrase or word is used twice in the scriptures, the one that is in red. And this word is only used in Daniel. This word, again, comes from the Aramaic word dur, meaning to dwell, to inhabit, to live, to reside in. Okay, so the root word from Tedidra, it comes from the word to dwell, to live in. This word constantly, or Tedidra, could be translated as continual, enduring, or constant. When a person dwells there, or they reside there, they are there constantly. That's kind of the idea here. Again, referring to actions when the word is used with a verb. The verb in the text is this word here, to serve. It functions as an adverb, which is, again, translated constantly, okay? Which is important. Let's take a look at the word serve for just a minute. The word for serve in the Aramaic is the word pelkach. It's used 10 times in the scriptures, 9 times in Daniel, once in Ezra. And it means to, again, to serve, to worship, or pay reverence to. Now, here's a good question. How did Daniel serve the God of heaven, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, being in Babylon? How did he constantly serve that? And how did Darius recognize that? Right? Well, we already know this, because Daniel in chapter 6, verse 10 tells us how he constantly served the Lord in Babylon. Verse 10. Now, when Daniel knew that the document was signed, that is the document that was going to basically call him guilty by the commissioners and the satraps, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber, He had windows open toward Jerusalem, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God as he had been doing previously. Remember, the document was signed, and it's like it was his business as usual. He paid no mind to it. It was just that's what it was. So his constantly serving was him bowing towards Jerusalem, which all of them knew. Right? That is his constant service to Daniel's God. Let's take a look at the word deliver, because Darius uses this word too. Shazab is the Aramaic phrase here. 9 times it occurs in the scriptures. It only appears here in the book of Daniel. It means to deliver or to free something. This word in this context, the way that it's used, Darius, underscores a person who is personally saved from calamity or destruction. Okay? Now, I want to take a look at something here, because I think that this is important. And the way, not just what Darius says, but the emphasis by which Darius says this. So let's see if I can do this here. Let's see if it'll help. Here is the sentence, or the statement in chapter 6, verse 16, that Darius says to Daniel. Of course, here at the bottom, you have this personal pronoun here, himself. But what's cool about this is this is the word here, deliver. This little symbol here functions as a pronominal. So he himself will deliver you. The emphasis is on God himself. It seems that Darius is very confident that the God of heaven will deliver Daniel physically. Okay? Even though he doesn't acknowledge that this God is his himself, he's very confident that the God of Daniel will deliver him from calamity. Maybe perhaps he was doing this because he felt a little bad for signing this document, perhaps. But either way, the major point is this. Although he did not acknowledge, that is Darius the Mede, acknowledged the God of Daniel personally, he was pretty confident and understood that Daniel would be delivered personally and physically. That's pretty incredible. Right? Now, how would Darius know this? How would he know this about the God of Daniel? Well, Daniel could have told him personally. I mean, they had a very great relationship. He was going to make him the second in command, and in order for you to do that, he has a great reputation within Babylon. We can also trace back essentially the annals of the kings as well. For example, Daniel in the revelation of his dream to King Nebuchadnezzar. That was written down, by the way. I'm sure that Darius was privy to that information. That wouldn't be a far stretch to infer. How about Daniel's companions? Daniel's companions are still around, by the way. They haven't gone anywhere. And Daniel was certainly there on the plains of Dura when this happened, right? And we'll talk about that too. I believe that there's a connection here as well. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But Daniel's companions were saved physically from the fiery furnace. I'm sure that Daniel told Darius about this, or Darius may have even heard of this by others who had told him. So it's not far-fetched for him to be pretty confident that the God of Israel, if he so chose, would physically deliver Daniel from death. physically. And Darius, by his speech, underscores this. He himself will do this personally for you. So once he was thrown into the lion's den, we read in verses 16 and 17 of chapter 6, was that a stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet ring of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed concerning or in regard to Daniel. So after Daniel, of course, was thrown into the den of lions, a stone was laid over Daniel's over the den's opening. That's a large stone laid over, right, where you need several people to pull this thing into over this opening, so Daniel couldn't escape, of course. And the king ordered this due to the fact that he has to abide by the law that he set, of course, and sealed it with his ring. Of course, if anyone wanted to remove this, this would be a death sentence for them, right? Because they're violating a law. And the rings of his nobles, too. So think about this. So he seals it with his own ring, and then you have the rings of the commissioners, the satraps, who also put their signet ring on the stone as a witness to the king's edict that this of course was the verdict, this is the guilty verdict, this is the plea, this is the sentence, right? So they all approved this, okay? They all did. They're all in on it, okay? Verse 18. So after he gets thrown into the lion's den, the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and sleep fled from him. Let's talk a little bit about these particular words here in red, because I wouldn't translate them this way. So let's see what we got here. Tevath is the word for fasting. It only occurs here in the scriptures, all right, one time here. It could be translated as fasting, as someone fasting, or being hungry, right? This is not necessarily fasting in terms of a religious ordinance or a practice. This is a loss of appetite. He's unable to eat because of the distress he's under. Remember, he didn't want to throw Daniel into the den. And yet he has thrown him into the den, and he feels personally responsible for this. And he is overwhelmed with just extreme concern. He cannot eat. So he refuses to eat. He's got a lot on his mind, Darius the Mede, right? But what about this word here, entertainment? No Netflix, right? No going to the movies. Okay, one time it occurs in the scriptures, again, only occurs here. This word entertainment actually could be translated as instruments of music, although I think there's a little bit more going on than just a disco. You know what I'm saying? There's a little bit more going on than just, music and stuff like that. Perhaps maybe some concubines within the mix here, a little bit of belly dancing, a little bit of that. Some revelry, some merriment, right? That type of stuff. He isn't even down with that. Okay? The concubines aren't going to do it for him. The music isn't going to do it for him. He can't no alcoholic beverages. He can't do that. No food. He's just overwhelmed. You can sense that he's probably sitting down in his chambers or whatever, just maybe pacing. Very concerned, talking to individuals. So there wasn't any, he had a loss of appetite, no pleasure was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. Again, Darius, according to the language here, was so bothered about Daniel and the position that he placed Daniel in, that Darius, he refused to eat, sleep again, or engage in pleasurable activities for himself. He couldn't take his mind off this. All he did was express extreme concern for Daniel and if he was alive and the lion's den or not. Now remember, again, Daniel was supposed to be in there for 30 days. Okay? 30 days, a month, 4 weeks. Forget those little details. Verses 19 to 20. The king arose at dawn, not sleeping. He just got up. He was awake at the break of day and went in haste, tripping over himself to get to the lion's den. He wanted to know whether or not if Daniel survived the night or not. Probably was apprehensive that he didn't. When he came near to the den, he cried out with a troubled voice. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? It's very interesting. But if Daniel was dead, he wouldn't answer, right? I mean, how would he know, right? So Darius, right at sunrise, when he got the chance, went quickly to see if Daniel was alive or not. Again, interestingly enough, if you recall, Darius to me was certain, he was pretty certain that God would deliver him. Yet Darius was extremely concerned for Daniel. You would think that, if God's got this, I'm going to go to bed, right? But he doesn't. Again, he overwhelms himself, right? Again, this goes to show that, again, Darius recognizes the God of Daniel, but he doesn't quite get it just yet. Okay? Not yet. Let's look at a couple of words here. Darius calls Daniel a servant of the living God. Okay? This word is avad here, servant. It occurs 8 times in the Hebrew scriptures, 6 times in the book of Daniel. It is translated servant or slave. Again, this is a person, who serves another with greater authority or influence. Again, it could be used, whether it be a king who has a person that serves them, or it could be used of a deity, particularly in the context of Darius talking to Daniel. He calls him the Avad, the servant of the living God. By the way, this word is also used of Nebuchadnezzar as well. It's used by Nebuchadnezzar, by the way, I should say, not of Nebuchadnezzar, but by Nebuchadnezzar. In Daniel 3, that chapter where it talks about the golden image, the image of the calf, the golden image, the image of Marduk. I'm sorry, wrong history. Okay, not the golden calf. It's a different historical account. In Daniel chapter 3, verse 26, after Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are rescued from the fiery furnace, or they're still within the fiery furnace, as a matter of fact, Nebuchadnezzar says this: Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire after he, burned it 7 times over. He responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire. So Nebuchadnezzar uses this concerning the servants of the Most High God as it related to Daniel's companions. He also underscores it in Daniel chapter 3, verse 28 as well. It says, Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command and yielded up their bodies so as not to worship or serve any God except their own God." Now, I find this to be very fascinating. Okay, I don't usually look for patterns. However, it's interesting that Darius uses this same word and Nebuchadnezzar uses the same word, and yet, where is Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 3? He doesn't get it just yet. He goes, "Yeah, well, your God is great, but not like Marduk, though." You know what I'm saying? Marduk's still my that's my team, that's my quarterback. You know what I'm saying? I think Darius is doing the same thing here. He doesn't get it just yet. He knows that the God of heaven can deliver Daniel, but I don't think he still acknowledges God as his, though. Very, very interesting. Even though he's very concerned. Darius once more acknowledges Daniel's God as Daniel's. Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God. Same construction from the word that we looked at. Whom you constantly serve. Same phrase. Been able to deliver you from the lions. Same word. From verse in Daniel chapter 6, verse 15? Yeah, verse 16. No, not verse 16. I lost it. Where is it? Yeah, 19. Yeah. No, verse 16. I was right. Same construction. Daniel, the servant of the living God, is your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions. Yeah. Same words there. Verse 21. Let's keep reading here. Then Daniel spoke to the king. "O king, live forever." Hey, he's alive. Because if he was dead, there would be nothing, right? Nothing. It'd be silent. Okay? "My God sent his angel and shut the mouth of the lions, or the lion's mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I've been found innocent before him, and also toward you, O king, have I committed no crime." Daniel replied to King Darius and explained to him that no physical injury or anything had happened to him overnight. How cool is that? Essentially, that again, like I said, it would have been a death sentence. There would have been no way he would have lasted 30 days. It would have been done, right? Daniel had stated that God sent his angel and closed the lion's mouth so that they would not eat him. I would like to return back to this phrase here because we looked at this phrase in chapter 3 of Daniel. I'd like to return back to this because I'd like to make a clarification. But before we do that, let's talk about the word here, malach. Malach is the word for angel, envoy, or messenger of some type. This word occurs 2 times in the Hebrew scriptures. It only occurs here in the book of Daniel, malach. It is translated as angel, envoy, or messenger. Okay? Either word is translated fine. This comes from the Hebrew word of the same phrase, malach. Okay? So we have the Aramaic phrase malach, which corresponds to the Hebrew word that is spelled and pronounced the same way. Okay? This Hebrew word is used, like I mentioned, in various areas. It could be used for angelic messengers or divine messengers whom God sends. It could be used for the angel of the Lord as well as God's angel, underscoring what we would call a theophany or a Christophany, the pre-incarnate Christ, right? Of course, this word also occurs in Daniel chapter 3, verse 28, and it is the same word construction that is also found in chapter 3, verse 28. Okay? So let me do my little pen thing. Okay? Here we have the word here, Moloch, right here, and it is connected to this word here. Same construction, same word here. Now, what's interesting here about this word, again, you could see that there is a symbol. Okay? That symbol again operates as a pronominal in this text. So his angel, his messenger. Okay? Again, same word, same phrase, same construction. So I mentioned in the previous teaching, I'm kind of honest about it, okay, that I was convinced that it was not the pre-incarnate Christ, but a divine messenger. If you go back to Daniel chapter 3, I mentioned that I was not sure if it was, probably wasn't, but I'm not gonna quibble about that. Okay, I believe the statement is still true-ish. It's true-ish. I believe that this is the pre-incarnate Christ for sure. However, as the great philosopher Obi-Wan would say, it's true from a certain point of view. Okay. Let me ask you a question. Let me turn to Daniel chapter 3 right quick, and I only have a little bit of time. In verses 24 to 30, okay. I'll just read just a portion of it. It says, then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste. And he said to his officials, to his high officials, was it not 3 men that we cast into the midst of the fire? They replied to the king, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm. And the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire and responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire, right? Verse 28, we'll skip down here. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him. Who is speaking? It's not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, remember, if you recall, is informed by the culture of the Babylonians, not the Torah. Okay? He thinks that this is maybe one of the sons of the gods, those lowercase g gods that work for Marduk. Right? So from the point of view of King Nebuchadnezzar, when he says it, it is the pre-incarnate Christ. I retract the statement in chapter 3. However, from Nebuchadnezzar's point of view, this is not the pre-incarnate Christ. This is a lowercase g God. Nebuchadnezzar more than likely thought that the God of Daniel's companions was one of the sons of the gods, the divine beings that served the kings of the gods of Babylon. Remember, he didn't get it until chapter 4. Okay? He's still on the Marduk train. King Nebuchadnezzar would have no reference and no clue of the angel of the Lord and what this meant, even though he used the term. Okay? I don't think he knew that. From Daniel's point of view, of course, since he was knowledgeable of the Hebrew scriptures, he would know what this meant. He would have said it as such. Very simple. From Darius's point of view, I think Darius knew what this meant. Why? Because he talked with Daniel. That's why. So, a clarification. I'm convinced based upon the structure, the grammar, and who is talking, this is more likely a theophany or a Christophany, where Daniel was physically rescued by the pre-incarnate Christ in much the same manner as Daniel's companions. From the mouth of Nebuchadnezzar, he thought it was a god, a son of the gods, or a lowercase g. From the perspective of Daniel, he's talking about the pre-incarnate Christ. He's talking about the God appearing before him and rescuing him from the mouth of the lions, which, by the way, that makes what Darius said true, right? However, I'm also convinced from the personal perspective of Nebuchadnezzar, even though this phrase is used, he didn't have a clue who he was talking about. Not even a clue. So yes, God physically and personally rescued Daniel from the mouth of the lions. Daniel continued his reply in that he was found not only innocent, that is pure, translated here, in the sight of God. He committed no crime or no sin, no violation against God himself. And usually the judgment of that is physical punishment within this economy, usually, which is why he's spared. And also toward you, O king, I have not committed no crime. So not only is Daniel innocent in the sight of God, but he's also innocent in the sight of Darius, and didn't violate any crime against the law of the Persians and Medes. As a matter of fact, they had to create a law for him to violate said law. Man, Bolshevism even still existed then. Man. Daniel chapter 6, verse 23. This is a cool kind of observation. Then the king was very pleased and gave orders for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him. Kind of like how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were taken out of the furnace, and I mean there wasn't even a hair singe. They didn't even have any smoke smell. Okay, it's like they didn't even go in. Right? Very, very, very similar in here. No injury whatever was found on him because he had trusted his God. I have a problem with this. This word "trusted." Let me tell you why. Aman is the Aramaic word here. This word occurs 3 times in the scriptures. It only occurs in the book of Daniel, though, this time that it occurs. And the word corresponds with the Hebrew word, aman, meaning to be convinced, to believe. Ironically, this is the same word that is used of Abraham. The first occurrence is in Genesis chapter 15, verses 4 and 6. 4 through 6. It says this, then behold, the word of the Lord came to Abraham, saying, this man will not be your heir, but the one who will come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir. Again, talking about Ishmael. And he took him outside and said, now look toward the heavens and count the stars if you're able to count them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. Then he believed in the Lord and reckoned it to him as righteousness. This is Daniel being convinced that God would deliver him. Very fascinating. It's not necessarily trust more than it is to be convinced that God would deliver him, to believe that the God of heaven would rescue him from certain death, right? Again, this is very similar to Daniel's companions and what they said. Do you remember what Daniel's companions said? They said, we believe that God will deliver us, and he will do that. However, even if he doesn't, we're still not bowing down to you. We're not bowing down to your idols. Okay? Very similar to chapter 3. It's very interesting that there's nothing in the text. It's not like God came to Daniel and said, hey, Daniel, I'm going to do you a solid. I'm going to rescue you. Do you really believe this? There's nothing in the text that says that. Very much like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. God didn't come to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and tell them, oh, by the way, Nebuchadnezzar is going to come to you. He's going to ask you to bow, but don't worry. I got you. There's nothing that says that. There's nothing in the text that stated that God came to Daniel and said that he would rescue Daniel from calamity. Again, the same could be said of Daniel's companions. However, Daniel was so convinced, based upon maybe perhaps previous experience that he saw, or even the fact that God is the living God and he can do this, that he was convinced he was able to rescue Daniel from death. But Daniel was even convinced that God was the true God, even if he didn't. That is amazing. Daniel wasn't concerned, but everyone else was. After we read of Daniel's testimony concerning him being rescued from the mouth of the lions, the king then gave orders, and they brought those men who would maliciously accuse Daniel, and they cast them, their children, and their wives. Even the wives, bro, into the lion's den. And they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. They didn't even get down to the ground. It's incredible. King Darius gave orders and seized the men who accused them, and King Darius took the men and their children and their wives and threw them into the den. And before they even hit the ground, the den of the lions dominated them and killed them, crushing them. Again, this underscores the God of heaven's activity against wickedness, against working against an innocent individual, particularly Daniel. This event, this thing that takes place, underscores something, again, just like Nebuchadnezzar, it signals something to Darius, which we will again explore next week. The God of heaven rescued and vindicated Daniel from the intrigue of the satraps and the commissioners. I want to make something very clear before we close here. This account, like all the others, Daniel's involved in this, but it doesn't really have anything to do with him. This is about the God of heaven and making himself known to the Persian king and the Median king. That's the goal, okay? We got to keep that in mind. This is not just about Daniel. This is about the God of heaven. Because this act that God does, again, sets off, again, a chain of events that take place with Darius that we can read at the end of the chapter, but we'll explore next week. By this action, the God of heaven again reveals himself as true, again, not only to the satraps and the commissioners who were pulverized essentially by the lions and eaten, but also King Darius. And we will find it's very fascinating. Next week, we will explore, if you were to take Darius's declaration and Nebuchadnezzar's testimony, they are so similar. I mean, it's almost like they both. Nebuchadnezzar could have wrote this declaration himself, this proclamation himself. It's amazing. So we will examine that, Lord willing, next week. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for this account. It's an account that we're all familiar with. We kind of know the end of the chapter, and we're aware of it. But there are some really cool details in here that show that you are, again, not just the God of Daniel, but you are also the God of the Persians and the Medes. What an incredible account. Thank you again so much for revealing this to us in your word so that we may know you. For it's in your Son's name. Amen.